So this is warps from Mutable Instruments, and using that first algorithm, which is a crossfader, I can show you what I've got at the input. I've got a triangle wave coming from one oscillator, and a lower pitch triangle wave from another. Now we can crossfade across these algorithms both with CV and with the knob turn on that gorgeous LED knob, so let's just crossfade manually. And we can control the timbre on each as well. Doing this under CV, let's plug something into the algorithm. This is just sample and hold, and another sample and hold into the timbre. So that's just step sample and hold modulation. We're going to get into some modulation patches across the algorithms, but first we're going to look through each of those algorithms and what they do. So I'm going to look at this crossfader, as you've already seen. Now I'm going to add a sample and hold to the timbre, which is now CV in, that step sample and hold, CV in the crossfader mount. Taking that out, let's CV the level of the first input. And then going over to the second input, let's CV that. So in the middle, so we're getting these nice changes from that sample and hold modulation. Plugging into the timbre, this is a third sample and hold source, all clocked from the same module. So getting those nice swells between both sides and those level differences as well. Now I'm going to take my output to come from a delay, create a little ambient patch with this crossfader. Add a little reverb. So with just the two inputs, some delay, some reverb, 3 sample and holds, one for each level of the input and the timbre, you've got this nice evolving ambient patch. Okay, so we're going to look at the second mode in warps, and that's a crossfolder. But I'm first in the first mode, just so I can show you a simple crossfader what's going on. Got 2 oscillators with 2 sine waves at the input, and this is input A, and that's input B, tuned the same. If I flick one down an octave, you can hear that. Now with the crossfolder, we've got a carrier and the modulator, and they're summed together, and a tiny bit of cross modulations added just to spice things up. And the resulting signals then sent to a wave folder. The amount of that wave folder is controlled by the timbre. So we could actually take out one of the inputs, go up to the crossfolder, let's try that on a lower pitch sound. Bringing that back up. Now I've got 2 inputs. Now if I drop the octave of one, and drop it a further octave, some wave folding. A little bit of dissonance from that difference in tuning between the oscillators. Syncing those would help just to lock that a little bit cleaner. But sticking in the same octave, let's add a separate sequence to the second oscillator. So again, let's use this crossfader to show you what's going on. So this is now one of my inputs, a different sequence to the other side. And let's take this to the crossfolder. And wavefold that. It can get pretty brutal, and like I said, if that tuning's not completely locked, there's some little dissonances that are added, which sound really great in a mix. Taking this into streams, with that now in streams in the basic envelope generator mode, let's listen to that. Great for all sorts of quite dissonant, full-on, folded and this cross-modulated West Coast style sounds. Okay, so let's move into that third mode, which is a diode ring modulator. The carrier and the modulator are crudely multiplied using a digital model of a diode ring modulator, and the timbre post-processes this signal with an emulation of gain which emulates that diode clipping. So at the minute I'm in that crossfader mode just so you can hear the inputs, two sine waves playing the same signal. Going up to the ring mod, what sounds like a subtle bit of modulation that's just from that detuning the oscillators again. Flicking one up an octave. You can hear that difference if we use the crossfader. They're the same. Now sticking in this same octave, let's go up to the ring mod again. And actually change the sequence that they're both playing, so we're getting some differences in those oscillators. Lots of nice ring mod grittiness, let's add some gain. Now let's change the octave of one of them to be higher. Gain again. I'm going to use some stepped sample and hold modulation, which is the same clock rate into the timbre for different gain amounts. Coming out of streams, we can use the envelope generator. Let's drop the oscillator that we turned up an octave down an octave. Down an octave again. Some more gain. Bring that back up 2 octaves. So I'm going to stick with the same patch for the next mode, and that's a digital ring modulation. So here's where we left the diode emulating ring modulator. With 2 different sequences playing. Let's take that back to be in the same sequence again. So again, using this crossfader. We've now got those in the same octave. So go up to the digital ring modulator. And this is a much gentler version than the diode ring modulator, which uses a proper multiplication operation in the digital domain, and the timbre post-processes this signal again with a gain boost and soft clipping. There's some really nice sort of digital fizz on top of that sounds great. Let's take this up an octave again. Crossfade back to the diode emulating ring mod. Hear the differences in tone. Let's change the sequences again. So both oscillators are playing 2 different sequences. The edge on this one just slightly harsher. Gain goes a lot further. Again, let's hear that with some envelope modulation through streams. And that into a nice low pass gate with a bit of ring, or into a filter first sounds absolutely gorgeous. Okay, so the next mode is exclusive Or Modulation. Both the carrier and the modulator are converted to 16-bit integers, and the two resulting numbers are XORed bit by bit, and the timbre controls which bits are actually being XORed together. I'm in the Crossfader mode just so you can hear what's going on. I've got a low pitch triangle, another low pitch triangle. It's got a little bit more grit on it. That oscillator is now being synced to the first input. So playing the same sequence, let's go up to the exclusive Or. And changing the timbre is changing which bits in this 16-bit signal are now being XORed. Really nice overtones with that. We could actually get an LFO or an envelope or something playing in time into that timbre, which works quite well. But first, let's actually change the sequence that these two oscillators are playing. So here's a second sequence into the second oscillator. These different overtones. Let's go back to the Crossfader and check these out. So input 1, input 2. A little bit of modulation from the oscillator sync to the XOR modulation. Some of the more in tune steps, we're getting a nice clean sort of grittiness added, and a little bit of sort of detuned grittiness added, and slightly more dissonance when they're slightly detuned, as the tracking on these two oscillators is slightly different. So taking my output from shades as a mixer, the second input here on shades I'm going to actually take from the auxiliary out. And this is a mixer of whatever's at its inputs, regardless of the processing and the algorithm. Like I said, when you heard this in the Crossfader, there's a slight little bit of modulation between the two oscillators, not tracking quite the same and then being in sync together. Now taking the first output into streams, I'm going to turn down the auxiliary in shades as a mixer, and turn up streams. Streams is in a virtual low pass gate, so it's emulating a low pass gate being struck with a different rhythm to that sequence. Some slightly longer notes. Now let's get them playing the same sequence. Let's turn one oscillator up an octave. Again, and down another octave. So playing with those octaves, we're getting some great tones. You can actually mix the two outputs, so here's the auxiliary out, and then some of the streams, low pass gate emulation on top. Okay, so now we're in the final mode before we hit that vocoder, which generally works better with much richer signals. But we're going to try this mode with some sines and triangles like we have already, and also some saw waves as well. This is a comparison and rectification mode, and a handful of signals are synthesized through this comparison and rectification operations that are typical in octave pedals. So octave pedals for guitarists usually. The timbre morphs through these different signals. So this is the Crossfader again, just a great way to show you what's coming into both sides. Same octave, both sine waves, nice and simple. Let's go up to that comparison and rectification. Flick through these different rectification and comparison signals with the timbre. So you can hear this sort of octave shift and added grain and grit as well, and that's just two sine waves. Let's take two saw waves. So going back to the crossfader, that's one input and the other. Up to the mode again. Really nice gritty overtones. Now let's drop the octave of one of the signals coming in. And up an octave. So let's take an envelope triggered with each note from this pitch sequence and actually put that into the timbre modulation. Taking this out, let's roll back through the modes that we've seen so far. Some envelope modulation. Really nice nasal, sort of weird gritty saw waves mixed together in that diode ring mod. Crossfolder. Crossfolding sounds great on those two saws as well. So modulate the timbre. Finally, back to the crossfader. Both signals the same. Okay, so the last couple of modes are the vocoder. And the vocoder is a digital model of a classic analog vocoder with a bank of 20 analysis and 20 synthesis 3rd octave 48 dB filters. The modulator's subband signals are processed by envelope followers, control the gain of each of the carrier subband signals. The timbre warps the connections between the modulator's envelope followers and the carrier's gain elements, effectively shifting up or down the formants that are extracted from the modulator's signal. There's 3 vocoder modes, and as we turn the algorithm knob, we're effectively increasing the release time of the envelope followers. By turning the knob fully clockwise to the last mode, we get a frozen, infinite envelope. And this release time becomes infinite, and that spectral envelope is then frozen. So here's my input sound, a female vocal from a sample pack.
Did you want them there, destroying their souls? You should have let them know love's the only way.
And I'm using an internal oscillator, which we'll have a little look at in a bit more detail, but the internal oscillator is turned on channel 1 and I've got no input. So here's the vocoder.
What didn't you do? Did you let them go down that road?
Let's change the timbre on that first vocoder mode.
Want them there, destroying their souls? You should have let them
and there's no dry wet, this is just a case of the first vocoder mode. Let's fade round to the second. When the internal oscillator is actually on, we've got the tuning instead of level on that mini pot. We've got a pulse. We've got noise as well. Or off, which would need an input, or a saw. Going all the way around, this is where it actually freezes. So a carefully placed gate, random gate, or some modulation of that can work really well for freezing the sound. So again, this is the input sound.
What didn't you do?
Now, this can actually track pitch as well. So here's plugging in a volt per octave signal into the level, which now becomes control for the pitch of that oscillator. It's going to play my pressure point, so it's got several different pitches. And we'll get into this a little bit more in a bit as well. But as well as that, we've got this timbre control. I'm going to use the pressure on the pressure points to control that. So let's freeze it. So we can actually create our own little cool oscillator sounds. Let's wait till we hear a bit of vocal we like. And we've got the different notes. The timbre. On the pressure for those pressure points. Now let's change the input signal. So this is now our input sound, drums. Here's that vocoder. Let's try the pulse. And this mixes with that original sound really nicely as well. Let's add some volt per octave to the oscillator. Tune it up a little bit. Timbre, the noise, turn the dry drums down. That'll sound great with the dry sound. Taking that noisy moving vocoder sound into something like a reverb or a delay and really compressing that up nice and fat and thick under the dry drum sound works really well for parallel effects. Let's get that into some reverb. So now I've got warps as output going into a reverb and then into streams as a compressor. So here's the compressed sound. Nice and fat, let's get that some reverb in. And then mix it with a dry sound. Okay, so let's look at the internal oscillator. For the first few modes up until that vocoder, we get a sine, a triangle and a saw, and that's because those lower harmonic waveforms work really well with the ring modulator and cross-folding XR modulation. So we start with a sine, we then get pitch control on that mini pot and volt per octave tracking. Triangle, pitch it up a little bit. And a saw. Moving to the vocoder section. These changed. Off, first wave, saw. Pulse. And noise. It doesn't really pitch track, but you got filtering on that. Now sticking with a triangle, I'm actually going to take my output from an oscillator to modulate this. So we've still got pitch, but let's take that from an oscillator. So here's a sine wave. I'm going to turn this oscillator up and you actually get phase modulation on this oscillator. Taking it out, we've just got a triangle and then this audio rate modulation. So to finish on, here's a little light show of all the lights off, just see that gorgeous knob moving and modulating and some random modulation between the algorithms. Got two oscillators tuned a fifth apart and a sequencer that's being modulated in both direction and whether it's running or not. I'm going to turn up clouds and I'm going to turn up a reverb on the output and just let this play out. Clouds, dry wet, here's some reverb. So that's Warps from Mutable Instruments, a really powerful dual signal modulator with lots of different modulation options, level control of the inputs, an onboard oscillator with phase modulation at audio rates, as well as 1 volt per octave tracking. You've got the mixed output regardless of the algorithm, the processed out, and all that modulation, and just great sound. It's just a really fun module. So as always, hit like and subscribe for more videos coming every week, and check the Patreon link in the description if you want to support my channel.